So I'm going to talk about the life of corrections with everybody here. And this is just talking about inmates in there, the staff, and then also some of the building structures and how they do punishment with the criminals, and then also some of the case laws that affected the criminal justice system and corrections to change it for the better for the inmates. And then, so to begin, with the inmates, there's a lot of bias and inequality that is seen in there. And then a lot of it is between men and women or just juveniles that are put into the adult system. And according to Professor Sanja Starr, men receive 63% longer sentences than women, and women are twice as likely to avoid being incarcerated than men. And this just goes to show that there obviously is inequality and bias between men and women. And then also too that there could be things that are done to help fix this, and then even when it is done, it could be intentionally or unintentionally, and it's just something that needs to be fixed. And then so when people first think of corrections, I believe the first thing that they think of is inmates. And then because of that, you want to know what is the life like of inmates in the system, and then some of the things that happen to them, like their health and safety. So for a normal schedule for an inmate, it all depends on the type of facility that they're in. Usually the higher the security, the less freedoms they have, and it is roughly around anywhere between 20 to 22 hours they could be locked up. And then the last hour, 2 hours, it can have the freedoms such as rec time, eating, and then showers. And then some of the health and safety issues that they can face is, as they're obviously set in capacity, over capacity in the facility, it can lead to overcrowding and easily transmitted viruses or illnesses or any kind of sickness. And then they can also be transferred through like blood, saliva, or sexual activities that can occur in there. And then Sykes and Messenger, they created 5 basic rules for that inmates follow, and they are: never interfere with others' interests, don't lose your head, don't exploit other inmates, don't be weak, and punish violators quickly and severely. The reason why they came up with this is just because it's to help keep all the inmates together and working as a cohesive group and in community. Because what the officers' goals are to get rid of the individuality of each inmate, and they want to make sure that they break them down so that way they don't act up and go crazy in there. And then some other things that are in there are also minors, because minors can either be in a juvenile system or they can be placed in adult facilities. And then another statistic is, during a single year, an estimated 2.1 million youths under the age of 18 are arrested in the U.S. This just goes to show how many children are actually arrested in there, whether they're placed in a juvenile center or in an actual adult facility. And now with this too, juveniles can be placed in adult facilities, but when they are in there, they must be separated from adults in the facility. They can't be around them at all. And then when they are obviously arrested or placed in a room, a judge has to review their case every few days to make sure everything is okay and make sure they're not being treated how an adult would be treated. And then another part of a group that is being talked about are the staff. And the staff make up the biggest portion, or a biggest portion of how they, I guess, survey the facility and defend it and protect it, and also keep track of the inmates. And then a normal schedule for them is, there isn't really a normal schedule because it's ever changing and always different. For example, they work more than 40 hours a week. They're expected to have overtime, and a lot of it is their schedules are a seniority rule. So they get to normally they get to choose what time periods that they work, and if you're a newer person, you're kind of SOL on it. So when they work, they experience a lot of issues, some of which can include burnouts and stresses, and that can be just because they're obviously overworked, they have changing schedules, they can't adjust to it, and then they have something that is called inmate desensitization, which is obviously they're being around inmates enough where they see a lot of the negatives that happen in the group, and they become desensitized to it, and they become used to it, so they don't have as much compassion for it, and they lack that. And then so there's a statistic that states that it is estimated that 37% of correctional officers experience job stress and burnouts. And this can be a problem just because you're in a facility with hundreds to maybe thousands of inmates, but there may be less than 10 correctional officers. And they obviously got to be in a facility with all these people that can cause issues for them. And inmates can harm correctional officers. They can make weapons out of anything they can find in their rooms. They can make them out of toothbrushes. They can also make them out of things that they use like glasses or eating utensils. And so they really have to be careful with what they use in the facility. Like, for example, they'll when they hand out toothbrushes to the inmates, they usually have them really short, so that way they can't have long knives, they can't hide them anywhere. And then with the glasses, they'll usually give them plastic, or they'll even give them small glasses. But some inmates won't do it because of the fact that if they need to wear glasses, they don't want to lose their rights and privileges to have them. So they don't want to take the risks and lose them. And other staff members that are affected by this are also nurses. And their jobs are obviously to help look after the inmates and provide assistance if it is needed. And then one of the huge issues that they face is being around inmates that are injured or have illnesses, because obviously they're working with them to help them in a situation they could contract diseases or viruses or illnesses. And since they're treating them, they're always going to be around it. And what they got to watch out for with that is some inmates may become violent and cause harm to them, and that could easily spread it that way. And then the next thing that I want to discuss is the building and architecture styles, as because they use these, they use these to separate the inmates, and as time progressed and how we changed our styles of how we house inmates and how we use punishments for them, it also changed how we view it. For example, the first style that we used was the linear design, and this was just the cells that were placed in a row just going down a hallway, and it just allows for easy, it's standard design and keeps it going that way. The second one was called the remote design, and this was how the inmate cells were all stationed around a common day room, and this allowed for indirect surveillance of the inmates, and it also allowed for when they're being surveyed, everything can be seen at once. Then the next one is also called the functional living units, and these are what you would expect, like what a house would be. It would be like a normal room, and it would just be like a vacation home almost. And this allows for easy one-on-one access, and it allows for close contact, and helps people to reform their ways and become better people, to be admitted back into society. And then how they do this is what they do with punishments, and there's different punishments that we've used throughout history and changed our ways. For example, we used to start off with corporal punishment, and that was just beating them, hitting them, doing whatever they can to make them change their ways. Another one was forced labor. They would have them mine or break rocks or just do something, and it was just, they believed that hard work would help them reform their ways. Another one was reformation, which we try to do now, and that's just house them in facilities and just help them change their ways and become like repent for what they've done. And they use a lot of programs for this, and it's just to help the people in the facility to be able to be readmitted back into society. And then one of the things that is seen too is retribution, and that is just by placing them in the facilities, and that's how they view it, as making the inmates view their wrongs, and it's just another way of punishing them is just giving them the so-called justice that they deserve. And then another thing that is brought up with that are some of the laws that changed corrections. For example, the first one is Procunier versus Martinez, and this was just male censorship. And this is one of the jobs that some of the staff do in the facility is they monitor male incoming and outgoing. They watch for any kind of drugs or contraband that comes in and out. And they're not allowed to necessarily read the information, especially with the attorney-client privileges, but they're allowed to scan it for any hidden messages that could cause problems for the facility or the safety of the staff inside of it. The next one is Turner versus Safley. And this is a big case because it allowed the facility and the staff members inside to infringe on the rights of the inmates as long as there is a actual real reason for them to do it, and as long as it's for the prison safety and the safety of safety of not only the inmates but also the staff inside. And then the next one is Johnson versus Avery. This was a big case too because it allowed the use of people to be pretty much prison lawyers. And then because when it first came around, a lot of people weren't able to get access to lawyers. So there's a gentleman that became a lawyer on the inside. It was a jailhouse lawyer, and so he helped with inmates with lawsuits and things like that. And then so what came around was the facilities, they have to offer some kind of access to laws or courts and systems and some kind of aid, and then it just helps them into the system. So with all of this, it explained the life of corrections, not only with the staff, but also with the inmates, whether they're juveniles or adults, and also the architecture, the building styles, and the punishments that they receive, and also some of the laws that were placed in that helped with corrections and changed the way that not only it helped inmates, but also provided for their safety. Is there any questions from anybody? All right, no, there's no questions, and thank you very much.
So you said about law enforcement, like the correction officers having certain schedules, timings for the prisoners.
Yes.
Why wouldn't they change that for the prisoners to keep always guessing? Because if they had the same times for everything, wouldn't you think they would plan something against the timings?
Well, they normally change the schedulings of the actual officers, and they may not have the same officers every single time, but they normally have the same set schedule, and that's just because with it being if it's a higher security facility, then they're only limited to so many freedoms. And it also, if you're keeping a set schedule for them, it allows easier access to track them and keep consistencies, just so you're able to make sure that, today at this time, this is what's going to happen, so we can have these set guards here watching this and not change the schedule around for the inmates, which also changes the schedule around for the facility staff, so it doesn't confuse everybody.
But if you're in like a gang affiliate area of the prison, couldn't they gang up on you? Like all the prisoners get together and plan something against all them officers if they're staging the same exact place at the same exact time every day?
Well, and that's another thing too, is with gang members, they try to separate and segregate gang members, because gangs are a huge thing in facilities, especially because even if people aren't necessarily in a gang, they'll try to get they'll try to get them to join the gangs. And they can usually pass messages by, like, we'll say they'll write something on notes and then they'll tie it to like a string, and then they'll pass it around to a different cell and they'll pass it around to other people. They can use Morse code on pipes and they can pass it that way. Or if there's vents or something, they can try talking in the vents and it'll pass to other people. Or they can even sometimes, which is very frowned upon in the system, is that they can have other guards pass messages for them. But with this is just to make sure that, especially high top tier like gang leaders, they'll keep them away from other members. So they try to prevent messages from being passed, and it's kind of hard to prevent that at the same time too, just because and this is just because obviously with the overcrowding in prisons, and just because there's so many inmates in there, you can have a ratio of 1 to 100 or 1 to 1,000, and that's the amount of officers to inmates. So the best that you can do is be prepared for it, and always watch out for yourself and have spatial awareness. Just be careful of your surroundings and pay attention to whether inmates are around you or not, and just be careful of what they're doing and look out for your safety first.
Now, with like if something did happen, what's the normal reaction time for like their team to come in and actually de-escalate the situation?
That I couldn't really answer for you, but it would be very, very quickly, because they always have somebody monitoring in the hallways, cells, and rec rooms. They always have people watching. So as soon as something happens, they react right away. They'll either get people just rush in there to stop it, or they'll gear up and then go in there. Any other questions?
So now you're saying about gearing up against the inmates. Like, what kind of equipment do they have to protect themselves when like a riot or something crazy happens inside the jail?
Well, if there's a riot, they'll usually have like face masks. They'll have body armor, like riot shields, and they'll usually use like smoke to smoke them out, or get them to all lie down prone, make sure they can't attack anybody else and go after anybody, or make sure they have no weapons. And it just helps prevent more injuries from occurring.
Well, what if this riot's already happening? How do you have time to gear up?
Usually they'll have like specific people go in first, and then they could have other people gear up for it or get all the equipment that they need and go in afterwards.
You said that if they make objects into weapons, what if they found those in the cells? What would happen?
Normally when staff find it, they usually try to, sometimes they'll be quiet about it, like not let other inmates know. Other times they'll like seal the area and make sure that they search the whole room, search a few cells just to make sure there's no other weapons, and try seeing that if, for example, parts of beds were filed down or toothbrushes, just to make sure that there isn't anything else in the rooms that can be used or where it came from, so they can take precautions and guard against it if other rooms have it, and just make sure that other people can't make weapons from the same things that they do. And they'll normally, if they do find weapons like that, or if they cause harm to other people, or they find drugs or paraphernalia or anything like that, they usually like grab them and make sure that they're punished for it. They'll charge them for other crimes, and then they'll usually sit in there for even longer than what they already are.
Now, do you think the correctional system in America is at a good time right now, or do you think there's still more to improve on?
There's always room for improvement. You can do better, especially when you're looking at a lot of facilities. Like the facilities themselves, like prisons, like they're declining where we don't have as many, but yet we're experiencing huge overcrowding in facilities. Like you'll have a facility that have a max capacity of, we'll say, 500, but you'll have like 800 people in there. And then rooms you'll have that are just enough room for 2 people, but you'll have 3 or 4 people sit in a room. And that also goes into what I was explaining earlier about how illnesses can be transferred, and sicknesses and diseases, and that's just because you have too many people there. And it can either be just overcrowded room where it's easily to pass, or just in areas where there's just too many people where it's easy to spread throughout the facility.
Go.
Now, you said about not having enough staff, or them not having enough breaks in between shifts. Do you think if they had more staff and more break times in between shifts, that they would have a better reaction time if a riot were to break out, have more eyes on the inmates, so on and so forth, so then there's not any more issues reoccurring over time?
I believe that, yes, I do believe that, and it doesn't just pertain to riots or dangerous situations in there. It also can help improve the staff health, and it could lead to just better health overall, just because of the fact of if they're given more time off or set schedules, or they could have more rest in between before they go back to work. It can lower the burnout rate, stress, and a lot of them too is they see the amount of hours that they work and the amount or what the work that they do is not worth the amount of pay, even if it is good pay. So I believe that if you give them more rest or better training or hire more staff, it can have a big impact and decrease the amount of stress and burnouts with the staff, and I think the staff will be happier and it would work better with the facility.
Now, do you think counseling sessions, like say that they're in a facility where it is more violent, do you think counseling for correctional officers, even staff members, would help their capabilities of doing their job better, to where they can vent out about what they saw, this, that, and the other thing, so they're not suffering possibly from PTSD from what they're seeing in there? I mean, you could be seeing an inmate getting killed by another inmate and they're laying on the floor and you just had to see that.
I do believe so, and they also that is one of the jobs that is there for what the nurses do, because they're usually there to help, and they can talk with, like, if they're experiencing psychological issues. They may not be fully in that part of the job description, but they can do that, and a lot of that does help them, and they do have counseling for that, and some of that counseling helps because of, obviously, what you explained with the PTSD, and it helps to lower that. You just have somebody to talk to, and that's another thing that they suffer from, is something called compassion fatigue, which is if they see enough negativity and all the bad stuff of it, they're gonna just not really care anymore, or it's not gonna affect them as much, so they're not gonna care about what their job is. They feel like they're not gonna make a difference. So having somebody to talk to and listen to, it can help save that compassion and allow them to keep performing their job at the base standard or better than what they can be doing.
Now, do you think some correctional officers have fear of when the inmate does get out and the inmate and the correctional officer did not get along, that possibly that they would come on and attack them after they got out?
Yes, definitely. And that does happen too, especially you hear about some riots, or there'll be a guard that gets attacked by an inmate or multiple inmates, and especially because inmates do harass a lot of the guards, especially females when they work in male facilities. They're harassed all the time. So women, when they go through their training, they're trained to be prepared for that, and not just them, the men, they're trained to be prepared for multiple scenarios or situations and how to handle them, and that's just make them be prepared for it and ready, so if they're stuck in that, they can react quickly and they know what to do, and not sitting there stunned on the spot, not knowing what to do, and having fear and being afraid.
Now, do you think women, not trying to separate men and women for correction officers, but do you think women should just be in women facilities and men should just be guarding the men, due to the fact that men are stronger than the women? So if a woman is in a male inmate facility, she's more prone to be attacked because, one, she is weaker, because it is proven that a man is stronger than a woman, for say. Now, do you think that they should be separated that way too, where men are working with the men inmates and women are with the women inmates?
I think it would help, but I don't believe it'll happen. And then that's just because of the equality of just making sure that women can have the same jobs as men can have the same jobs as women, and that just has the equality for both of them, just to have both jobs. But it'll definitely be harder for women working in a male facility, and that's just because it's a male-dominated place, and it can be stressful or hard, and they can be harassed, or they can feel that they're not up to snuff. So they got to work harder, and they feel like they got a lot more to prove. So it could cause issues for them, because they feel like they got to do more than what's necessary, or they got to work harder, and that can lead to issues. But I don't believe that women should be forced to only work in women's prison and men work in men's only.